All right. So personality. One thing about personality, I like to point out, there's lots of personality exams and tests and quizzes and things out there you could take to learn about yourself. One of my favorite ones is what Pooh Bear character are you from the Pooh Bear show, Adventures of Pooh. So the reason why this is so awesome is because of the eclectic and the group of individuals or characters that are so different. You've got Tigger, that's the high energy. You've got Roo, which is kind of the innocence, childlikeness. Pooh Bear, which is the mindfulness in the moment. Eeyore, who is kind of the pragmatic, realist, maybe sad. Then you've got Rabbit, who is the high strung, very very OCD. Things have to be perfect. You've got Piglet, who worries. You've got Owl, who's our resident professor slash wisdom, and you've got Kanga, which represents kind of the motherly, the kindness, and the heart. And then you, of course, have Christopher Robin. So all of these characters we can all relate to one or more of these characters. So personality is a long-standing trait and patterns that propel individuals into consistently think, feel, and behave in specific ways. Okay. So when we think about that, the word consistently, this is the key to personality. It's kind of like your base. Of course, you change for context and things can be different in certain situations. But when it comes to personality in general, it's a relatively stable trait. It's a relatively stable way of being. Our personality is what makes us unique. And again, it's thought to be long-term, not easily changed. So that's when you got to get into, what is core personality versus mood or emotion, like we talked about last time. So the historical perspective of personality. Well, it started with Hippocrates. He thought personality was based on the four fluids or the humors. You had your caloric temperament, which is yellow bile from the liver, melancholic temperament, which is black bile from the kidneys, sanguine temperament, which is red blood from the heart, and phlegmatic temperament, which is white phlegm from the lungs. Galen built on this theory, suggesting that diseases of personality differences were explained by imbalances of these humors. And then Franz Gall came along, and this is a super fun one. He came along with phrenology, which was a very, very popular pseudoscience. Basically, the lumps on your head would kind of indicate the type of personality you were. So let's say I have a lump like right here. Well, that means I have lots of hope. So obviously this has been discredited, but nonetheless, it makes you think, hey, what's going on now in the world of psychology that, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we're going to say that was ridiculous. So this is one of those, but still very interesting. So Freud in the psychodynamic perspective, Freud in the unconscious drives. Okay. He believed that our personality was developed by our unconscious drives. Okay. So remember, Freud was a medical doctor, not a psychologist. Freud published a book called The Studies of Hysteria with Joseph Breuer. Freud thought hysteria was a result of sexual abuse in childhood, but Breuer disagreed. And they basically went their separate ways based on a patient called Anna O, which Freud did much of his research from. Freud's levels of consciousness, and we're talking about Freud's levels of consciousness, okay? We know that non-conscious exists. That's the things like the procedural memory, implicit memory, things like that. We know that it exists. It's been tested. It's been validated. But when we start talking about Freud, it's a little bit different. Freud, his consciousness were mental activities that we could access at any time, but unconscious were mental activities we are unaware of. These are our unacceptable urges, desires. These are things that are repressed. Freud compared our mind to kind of like to an iceberg, and I'll show you on the next slide. Freudian slips are usually because of aggressive urges, but research shows they really tend to occur when we are tired, nervous, or not at our optimal cognitive functioning. So Freudian slip would be when you say the wrong thing accidentally. Like let's say someone says, oh, have you talked to your mother lately? And you say, and you mean to say, oh, I talked to her yesterday. And instead you say, unfortunately, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, oh, why did I say that? And Freud would say, "Oh, it's because you have aggressive urges towards your mother." But really, it could be this is a slip of the tongue, unfortunately, because maybe you had a conversation you didn't like. I don't know. Usually they're sexual in a manner. So it may be you make a sexual reference towards somebody and you're like, "Whoa, where did that come from? I didn't mean to." Freud would say that that's a sexual urge. It's that's why you have that Freudian slip. Personality develops from conflict between two forces: biological aggressive and pleasure seeking drives, and internal controls over those drives. And here's his iceberg. So Freud had his id and his superego. Now, the id and the superego are constantly at battle with one another. The id wants it. I like to think of the id wants it. The id doesn't care. It just wants it. So id wants to seek that gratification. Whereas superego says, no, 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 no. Here's the morality of it. We better not do this. Probably bad plan. So the id wants it, and the superego says, no, can't have it. So if the id wants to have sex, it's just gonna have sex, doesn't care. Superego goes, no, no, no. We could get pregnant, could get an STD, you know, if they could leave you. There's all of these things. The superego is like, just don't do it. You just need to wait. And it's like, yeah, I don't care. So that's where the ego comes into place. Okay. The ego comes in to say, okay, guys, we need to work this out. We need to figure this out, id and superego, because this is not working for us. So it comes up with the reality principle, and it uses defense mechanisms to mediate the id and the superego, according to Freud. Okay, neurosis is an imbalance in these systems. So, defense mechanisms is how the ego operates to be able to manage the id and the superego's argumentation. So, feelings of anxiety result from the ego's inability to mediate the conflict between id and superego. So, defense mechanisms are unconscious protective behaviors that aim to reduce anxiety, unaware we are using them, according to Freud. Now, in our modern day concept of defense mechanisms, we know we're using them. Like, we know we're using rationalization. For example, Miss Brown, I'm sorry I didn't finish my test. My internet went out at 10 o'clock last night. Well, the test was due at 11. Is it true that your internet went out? Yes. But is it a rationalization when you really think about it? Test was open for 2 weeks and it was extended an extra week. So it's one of those kind of like, we know we're rationalizing, we know that it's there, but according to Freud, the id and superego, the ego's rationalizations, we don't know we're even doing it. So we get into some of Freud's more interesting ones, like sublimation, for example. Sublimation is not something we would give credence to. We don't look at it at a surgeon and say, okay, you became a surgeon or a mortician because you decide that you want to cut people open, or you're a boxer because you just want to punch people in the face. That would be sublimation, taking a unacceptable desire and finding an acceptable way to be able to act upon it. And there's lots of defense mechanisms, by the way, and this is super interesting. Like, if you wanted to go in and kind of check out the defense mechanisms, Wiki's a really great place to go for this. So you could check out the Wiki. Let me see if I have. Let me pull this up. I don't have that one up, but if you go to Freud's defense mechanisms, and Simple Psychology has a good list of them too, but the Wikipedia, though, has it listed in different forms. So it's just really super interesting stuff, just for fun anyways. Denial, for example, we obviously know denial exists now. We know that people use denial, but in Freud's view, people don't know they're using denial. Like, they don't know it's happening. Whereas in most cases, when you talk to somebody and you say, this is really going on, they'll be like, I know, but I'm choosing just not to acknowledge it. So, all right. So, and we can see how all of this kind of happens. Acting out, regression, which is down here. Where's regression? It's somewhere in here. Regression is somewhere in here. But anyways, you guys can check this out. You don't need to know all of them. There's just a few in your textbook, but you guys can check this out. They're super interesting. All right. So Freud's psychosexual stages. We have already covered Freud's psychosexual stages in the lifespan chapter. It's the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital phases. We've already covered those. We've talked about the Electra complex. We've talked about the Oedipus complex. So we've already gone over these stages in lifespan. So I'm not going to spend time going over them in this chapter. Alfred Adler. We did not, however, talk about Adler. So with regards to Adler believed that individuals were constantly striving to feel superior, that we felt inferior initially, and we had an inferiority complex. And so we would become who we were, trying to find worth. Adler believed the importance of social connections, careers, friendships. This is where we're getting into the social aspect of things. And Adler also believed in the importance of birth order. Research on this topic remains inconclusive. And by that, what we mean is some research supports Adler's birth order. The older child is more likely to go into a helping field. The younger child is more likely to go into an entrepreneurial type of field. So we do see some research to support Adler's birth order. It's been done time and time again, but there's also been research that kind of discredits it. It doesn't work out. It just really depends. So, all right, Erik Erikson, these are the 8 stages of psychosocial development. You wrote a paper on it, so you guys know this really well. We've already covered this. So revert back to the lifespan chapter for this particular information. We've already covered it. But as you know, for example, autonomy versus shame and doubt. If you're given the ability to do things on your own, you develop a sense of autonomy. You have purpose. Whereas if you're not, then you have a sense of shame, a sense of doubt that you can't do things. So that's how Erikson would say that our personality is developing. Then Carl Jung. Carl Jung developed a theory called the analytical psychology. This focused on working to balance opposite forces of conscious and unconscious thought and experience with one's personality. He saw it as a collective unconscious, which is a universal version of personal unconscious, holding mental patterns which are common to us all. Things such as ancestral memories, they're called archetypes. So things like the hero. The hero is an archetype. It's like it is. We have concepts of what a hero is like. So we have these archetypes. Proposed 2 attitudes towards life: introversion and extroversion. And then he also proposed the concept persona. So we have a persona that we live according to Jung, and the mask that we adopt is kind of the compromise between the true self and societal expectations. Like for me, for example, my true self is loud and super boisterous. Oh, Caleb is loud and super boisterous. I'm all, let's get into it. Let's take care of it. And it is not uncommon for me, especially if I'm sitting outside. People are in trouble if I'm outside, to just be like, oh my gosh, it's so funny, and just be really loud. But because it's not really socially acceptable to be kind of the loud and super, laughing. I mean, it's funny. People give me a weird look when I'm laughing, but I'm like, I'm laughing. That should be a happy thing. So, but, because that is not really totally acceptable, I have this persona, which I kind of put on as being an outgoing individual, but still super chill, when actually I'm really, really, really high strung. So Karen Horney came along, and she did not agree with Freud. She did not agree with Freud's penis envy, and she came along with her womb envy to kind of combat Freud. She said, really? Well, we're jealous that you have a penis. Well, I'm jealous that you're jealous that you can't have a baby. So she really pulled away from Freud. She disagreed with him. One thing that came out of Horney's research, or Horney's theories, that was really interesting, and we've kind of held on to, is she did a lot looking into people's coping styles, how they coped with situations. She said that some people move towards, that's affiliation and dependence, as in like something's going on, you reach out for somebody, and others, people moved against, so they become very aggressive or manipulative, and others moved away. So some moved towards, some moved towards, some moved against, and some kind of pulled away. So the behavioral perspective then comes along. A pure behaviorist truly believes your personality is shaped by your consequences from the environment. So if you are constantly getting berated for talking, then you may be much more shy. You may be less to speak out, according to behaviorism. Skinner disagreed with Freud's ideas that personality is fixed in childhood. Our responses can change as we come across situations, new situations. A true behaviorist would say that personality is built from childhood. It's pretty strong by the time you're in your teens or older, but circumstances can change your perspectives or your attitude or even down to your personality. So a pure behaviorist, though, would say that it's all based on the environment and how the environment responds to you, and you respond to the environment. So then came along social cognitive perspective. Now, a social cognitive perspective, with this perspective, this emphasizes learning and cognition as a source of individual differences in personality. This was the Bobo-Doll studies. Remember, we learned about the Bobo-Dolls and observational learning. The social cognitive theory brings in concepts like reciprocal determinism, observational learning, which we've talked extensively about, self-efficacy, which we've also talked about. They all play a part in personality development. Now, reciprocal determinism we have not talked about. Reciprocal determinism is the concept in which cognitive process, behavior, and context all interact. Each factor influencing and being influenced by other stimuli. So we have our cognitive processes. These are our beliefs or our expectations. Then our behavior, and then the context in which the environment or situation that we are in. And all those interplay with each other. Somebody who is, according to reciprocal determinism, somebody who is leans towards being slightly more aggressive will seek out more aggressive situations in which aggression is present. Whereas somebody who high sensation seekers is another thing. Somebody who needs a lot of sensation to kind of get their dopamine and oxytocin dropping, they're going to seek out those situations. Of course, we've already talked about observational learning at length in the learning chapter. So through observational learning, we come to learn what behaviors are acceptable as well and rewarded in our culture. We also learn to inhibit deviant or socially acceptable behaviors by seeing what behaviors are punished. So when we see others being punished, or when we see if something doesn't work for us, we're less likely to do it again. So, and that's observational learning. And we've done a great deal of discussion of this already, so in other chapters. All right, self-efficacy. We talked a good bit about self-efficacy. Remember, high self-efficacy, you're more likely to get started. Okay. You're more likely to keep going. Just keep swimming. And you're also more likely to ask for help. You're more likely to ask for help if you have high self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief in their ability to do something. And we've already talked pretty extensively about this in the last section. So. All right, so locus of control we have not talked about. I love locus of control. It's such an interesting concept. Locus of control refers to the belief and the power we have of our own lives. We have internal and external. Internal locus of control individuals tend to believe that most of our outcomes are a direct result of our efforts. This is our successes as well as our failures. External locus of control tend to believe that outcomes are outside of their control. They see their lives as being controlled by others, luck, or chance. So let's say, for example, I was late last night to meet with a friend. And so when I got there, I said, I'm so sorry I'm late. I had to fix. I didn't think about setting the thermostat properly. So I had to go back home to do that before I could come out here. And she said, oh, well, that's not your fault. And I was like, well, yeah, no, totally kind of is, because I should have set the thermostat this morning at 8 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like it totally was my fault. I just realized, oh no, I can't leave the house for 2 days and not fix the thermostat. So, and she was like, oh, well, yeah, but it's the thermostat's fault. And I was like, is it? Is it the thermostat's fault? So but she's very, very external locus of control. I'm very internal locus of control. Um, so, and we're not getting into like the self-effacing and self-serving biases and all of those things that you can find in the social chapter. We're not getting into that. But just from a standpoint of external, internal locus of control, people with internal locus of control tend to have better lives. They tend to have less stress, partly because when they observe something going on, the first thing they say is, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to make things better? If they discover there's nothing they can do, then they are more likely to say, okay, there's not anything that I can do, so I am going to let this go. I am going to move forward. So, and external locus of control, a lot of times individuals, we know that the perception of control is one of the key factors in lowering stress. So people that feel like they're just kind of bouncing around by fate or by coincidence or nothing's their fault, they have no control over anything, there's higher stress levels. All right, so Walter Mischel and the person's situation debate. Mischel found that although behavior was inconsistent across different situations, it was much more consistent within situations, so that a person's behavior in one situation would likely be repeated in a similar one. Okay. So Mischel contributes the idea of self-regulation, also known as willpower. Willpower is not the same as delay of gratification. People get those two, they kind of tie those two together. Self-regulation is making decisions to do things and having good time behavior management. I mean, you can't really manage time. You only get 24 hours in a day, but behavior management, it can include delay of gratification, but that's not all it is. It's not just, oh, I'm gonna not do this and wait till I can get something better. Sometimes it's, I'm going to not do this and there's no result. There's no better later. It's just a conscious decision to regulate that behavior. So the humanistic approach, this includes like Maslow and Rogers, and we've already talked extensively about Maslow. This is the third force in psychology. So we talk about things that are strong in psychology. Humanistic approach is still very strong in the field of psychology. Humanism is touted as a reaction to both pessimistic determinism and the behaviorist views of humans passively reacting to the environment, which has been criticized as making people kind of out to being like robots. A pure behaviorist is going to say, if you are punished for something, you won't do it again. If you are reinforced for something, you will do it again. Ergo, here I am leading my life just based on how I'm punished. I'm not really making any decisions. Whereas humanistic approach says, no, we're more in control than that. Abraham Maslow studied people who were considered to be healthy, creative, and productive. Maslow found that such people tend to be more open, creative, loving, spontaneous, compassionate, concerned for others, and accepting of themselves. Maslow also brought us, remember the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we've already studied, we've already looked for, where if you give somebody the proper tools, they're able, or if they push through, but they're able to work to self-actualization. All right, so Carl Rogers, this is where all the self stuff comes from. Self-esteem, self-concept, ideal self, real self. So this is where Carl Rogers' main ideas about personality regards self-concept, okay? Who am I? Your answers can kind of show how you see yourself. The ideal self is the person you would like to be, whereas the real self is the person you actually are. We are in congruence when our thoughts about our real self and our ideal self are very similar. So if our real self and our ideal self are similar, we're in congruence. We're in a kind of a calmer state. We're more relaxed. Conversely, though, however, when there's a great discrepancy between our ideal, who we believe we are, and our actual selves, there's a state of incongruence. So, for example, if you have somebody that truly believes that they are a good person, but here they are damaging people's reputations, hurting others, there becomes an incongruency there. And there's a lot of stress involved with that. So if your ideal self is that you want to go into nursing, but you're not getting through that math class, your real self isn't getting through that math class, there's an incongruency. Your ideal self is going to be a nurse. Well, how can I be a nurse if I can't even do math? And that's where the self-efficacy steps in to say, hey, you are capable of doing this. You just may need to process a little longer than others. So what do you need to get you the help to get through that? The biological approaches. Psychologists who follow this perspective feel inherited predispositions and physiological process explain personality. So this again, heritability is a portion of difference among people that is attributed to genetics, leadership, obedience, sense of well-being. Some of the examples. We believe that temperament has a biological basis, okay? Our reactivity, how we respond, as well as our self-regulation, the ability to control our responses, as well as these are the two dimensions of temperament. We do know that aggression is genetic. So if Silver Fox studies, if you check out the Silver Fox studies, pretty cool stuff. I need a video. Hold on. Let me go back to Google. If you check out the Silver Fox studies, the Fox Domestication Project and Genetic Complex Behavior. I'll let you watch this little 3-minute video. Let's check this out. Hold on. Because this is really interesting stuff.
And there is a scale for the behavior with minus and plus. And team one has plus behavior, they can approach your hand, they have no fear. And there is always a minus behavior when it's afraid.
Ужасно странно, совершенно одинаковые они какие-то. Такой, и идешь сначала одни кидаются, 40-й бушет такой. Одни радостно кидаются, они причем были отогнаны на очень ручные, очень агрессивные. Потом идешь в другую бушеда, и там они... It's very interesting that aggressive ones have very high attention span.
Yeah.
When they see a lot of people, they have a fear.
Right.
But when they see one people, they try to defeat them, to attack them.
Yeah. 'Cause there's too many people.
Well, even one human is enough when you open the cage.
Yeah.
Because
They're too afraid.
it's too much of the stress.
Yeah.
You see that it's even wagging his tail. What's so interesting?
See,
And different eyes.
Yeah, one eye is...
Blue and
yeah, it's more tame. I think 3, maybe plus 3. You can take them on hands too.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that was just playing around like, okay, let's have a fun time. Now you can go back and watch the full video if you want to, the Silver Fox experiments. This is more of I just want to show you the different foxes. But you have the minus, which is the aggressive, and the plus, which is the domesticated. They fully domesticated the foxes. I mean, we even have people are getting foxes as pets. Just as a warning, though, a fox is still a fox, the same as a animals have different personalities. A fox is still a very deviant little creature, and it's kind of in sneaky mode all the time. Even if it's domesticated, won't hurt the human, but it's not going to crawl in your lap and be like, "Love me." The same as a cat. Quite often will be like, "Okay, you can give me attention now. Oh, I'm finished." Whereas a dog is constantly seeking attention. It's constantly wanting to get that attention. All right. So we know that there's a relationship between we know that there's a relationship between uh genetics and nature or nurture with regards to um behavior, but we also know that there's a strong genetic component. All right, is there a relationship between body type and temperament? We have found that no. Even though the media would say, larger people are more jolly, more happy, fit people are more intelligent, less more assertive. No, not necessarily. We don't see a relationship there. All right, so getting into the trait theories. So one thing I'm going to have you guys do, and I'm going to put this into because we can't do it today because we don't have the time, but I am going to put it in the chat and you guys can do this on your own. So there is a Big 5 out of service personality test. So I'd like for you guys to check that out. Take this test. It tells you what traits you have. It's a pretty interesting test. It's pretty valid, reliable, in essence of it's still an online test. You're still answering it sitting at your house. So I wouldn't give it 100% credence, but the results can give you a good insight to yourself. A lot better than what Pooh Bear character are you, or what apple are you, and that determines your love life or whatever. Much better than that. All right, so trait theory. We believe theorists believe that we all have certain traits or characteristics. Gordon Allport organized personality traits into 3 categories. Cardinal, these are the ones that dominate your personality. Central, the ones that make up your personality. And secondary, these occur under specific circumstances. Okay, Raymond Cattell then came along and identified 16 factors. We still use a personality assessment called the 16PF. We still use this personality assessment even today. So Heinz and Sybil Eysenck focus on temperament, which are inborn and genetically based personality differences. Eysenck thought that people had 2 personality dimensions, basically extroversion, introversion, neuroticism, stability. So it works kind of like this. You had that's a terrible circle. You had your extroversion and your introversion, and you had your stable, and you had your unstable and neuroticism. Okay. And you had characteristics in each category based on extroversion, introverted, stable, or neurotic. So problem is not really enough dimensions here. Plus we find that adolescents are going to lean more in this category. Then as you age, you kind of crawl more over to the stable category. So one would argue, is it really getting at people's core personalities? So there's been questions. They added another dimension later, psychoticism versus superego control. People high in superego control have high impulse control. They are more altruistic, empathetic, and cooperative. The 5-factor model. This is the Big 5 that I just showed you in the chat. So you guys should check that out. This is where you have basically 5 traits. You have openness to experience. Where is it? Oh, it's behind here. Darn it. Let's pull it up again. You have the basic 5 traits. Let me show you how this works. I'm just going to Christmas tree it for you. I'm not actually answering them. It's Christmas tree. There's a lot of questions, so I'm just going to bounce around here. Try not to miss any. Not reading them. Let's see. Da-da, da-da, da-da. It shouldn't take too terribly long. Probably should have prepped this. All right, here we go. So it's going to give you dimensions on the scale OCEAN, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I can check female. I'm going to put my age. Now you don't have to answer the rest of this stuff if you do not want to, but I'm going to put, I did not answer them truthfully because I didn't answer anything else. So I put no, submit. Oh, I forgot a question. Look at that at the top, no less. All right. Submit. All right. So it gives you, this is so cool. So open-mindedness, high scores tend to be creative, curious, complex. Low scores tend to be conventional, down to earth, narrow interest, uncreative. This is not judging you. All right. So negative emotionality, which used to be called neuroticism, is now negative emotionality. These are people, if it's higher, higher scores tend to be more nervous, more high strung, more insecure. They worry more. Lower scores tend to be more calm. So this is not, so people are like, I scored higher in neuroticism. What's wrong with me? Or negative. Nothing's wrong with you. It may just be that you are have a more high strung type of personality. You're more anxious than others. That's not a bad thing. I think that we've gotten into a bad place when we look at things and we say, I am not very open to new experiences, and that's a bad thing. Not necessarily, because we need, it takes all kinds to make the world work, and we need people who are kind of just want to hang out in their small town and do their thing. If everybody was sensation seeking, nobody would be here to take care of town. So anyways, and over the years, I've taken this test probably the last 15 years, I know, because I've been sharing it with my class for the last 15 years. And I have seen that my openness to experience has dropped a bit. My extroversion has also dropped a bit. All right. So culture and personality. Culture is all belief, customs, art, and traditions of a particular society, both universal and cultural specific reasons for variation in personality. Asian cultures are more collectivistic and less extroverted. Europeans are higher in neuroticism. Regional differences in the United States may be due to selective migration. People choose to move to places that are kind of compatible with their personalities. So personality assessment. So anyways, that's the section on personality traits. Check out that Big Five. It's pretty interesting. So going into how do we assess personality? Well, one way is self-report inventories. We assess personality using the multiple choice or numbered scales. This is a Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. It's got about 500 questions. And it asks you, and the questions could be things like, I like mechanics magazines. The way this test was developed was getting norms of what people would say in different populations. And so this is a clinical scale. It also has reliability and validity scales. So if one of the questions, for example, is, I like to play with feces, someone who's trying to look insane would say yes to that. But here's the deal. No one says yes to that. Even people who are, clinically mentally ill, they're not going to say yes to that. It's a not answer. People don't say yes to that. And so if somebody's lying or malingering, that we call it, they would have a really high lie scale. And so we would know, okay, they're not telling the truth. They're obviously trying to look like something's wrong with them because of the lie scale. Not used to diagnose, more so used to diagnose than other tests. But if, for example, if somebody were to take this and they scored high on depression, I would say, okay, I'm going to give them a test for depression. I'm going to give them another test to see if they do have depression. So based kind of on the different personality triads. For example, I scored very high on psychopathic deviance and very moderate on I'm kind of moderate on everything, but I'm high on psychopathic deviance when I was in college, and very low on social responsibility. So it was like, what? I don't have psychopathic deviance. But the reason why I scored so high on that is because I kind of go against the grain. I don't mind saying, well, I don't think that's really right, or I don't agree with that. So people that are more likely to go kind of against the grain, or kind of that don't follow traditional rules necessarily, they're going to score higher, but that doesn't make them psychopathic. So you can't just say, ooh, they scored high here, so, oh, that's a problem. So, and then I just took it recently, actually last year, again, all 500 questions, and I kind of got middle of the road on everything. And I was like, dang. So there's really no standout anything with me, but, kind of middle of the road. All right. Next is, these are personality tests. These are tests that are more objective, in essence of we score them and then we look at the scoring to see where the triads are, where the higher scores are. And then from that, we do further testing. Projective tests. These are your ink blot tests. These are ones that people seem to like a lot. They think they're fun. But the projective tests are just that. It's based on your projections. So a projective test relies on defense mechanisms. They're very Freudian. Projection proposed by Freud. A person is led to think about feelings, tell stories. So for example, the Rorschach ink blot test, you'd see this ink blot, I can't obviously make it look the same on both sides, but you'd see this ink blot. It's got the same look on both sides. And it's like, well, what are you seeing here? And so, I mean, if you say something like, I see two demonic bleeding Mises with blah, blah, blah. If you get all like super into it and, it's a giant penis on fire coming out of a diseased vagina, I mean, it's going to be like red flag. Okay, we're going to red flag this. We may need to do some further testing. So we may use this for screeners. Not a test that I would use simply because it doesn't have any reliability or validity. It really is dependent upon the interpretation of the clinician. It's got some scoring to it, but even the scoring itself doesn't really hold much water. So,
But I had a question.
Yeah.
It's a very minor thing, and of course, for me, it's a reference. I was just wondering, have you ever seen the movie Watchmen?
No.
Okay, because there's a character in that whose name is Rorschach, and his mask is basically like 2 layers of something with a fluid in between, to where it like kind of moves like a Rorschach test.
Cool.
But I was just saying, because there's a part in the movie when he's actually getting like analyzed, like in like a prison using the Rorschach test.
Oh,
and
neat.
It's very interesting because you see like you'll like see what he actually thinks of when he sees it, and then he'll just be like, some pretty flowers.
Okay. That's neat. I'll have to watch it. It's called The Watchmen. Is that what it's called? The Watchmen?
Yes. Sorry, the chat came up and I clicked.
Oh, that's okay.
So,
I'll have to check it out for sure.
Yeah, a lot of times it'll be like you could go to Walmart and they'll sell it in like a 2-pack with that and the V for Vendetta, which is also a very good movie.
I've seen that.
Yeah, well, a lot of times they'll come in a 2-pack like that because they're kind of like both superhero movies that aren't like
the anti-hero.
Actually, they're both made by Vertigo Comics, which was recently which within the past few years was purchased by DC. So some of the characters from Watchmen are now in like the DC continuity. So
I did not know V for Vendetta was from a comic. That's so cool to know.
Yeah, I actually have the original graphic novel. If I like, I'll send you a picture or something.
Cool. That's really neat. Thank you. I'll have to watch The Watchmen. That might be one to talk my husband into watching. I'm sure that he will. All right. So the thematic apperception test is also a perceptual test. This is where you look at ambiguous pictures and you ask the person to tell a story of the picture. Now, if the person tells if 5 different cards in, the person has the same theme of somebody being watched or somebody spying, then we're going to go, okay, there may be some things going on here with paranoia, and we may give a test for paranoia or for schizophrenia. Again, it's another test that unless I'm doing a battery of testing, because I've been asked to do a battery of tests, I wouldn't do those 2 tests. Next is contemporized themes concerning Black's test. This is a CTCB. It's like the TAT, but it's shows pictures of scenes of African American lifestyles, because the comment that was made about the TAT was that the pictures were very racial specific. So, and then the Rotter incomplete sentence blank. I use this all the time because this does give you kind of something to talk about when you're talking with somebody. It's things like, I feel blank. I'm happy when blank. My mother blank. And so it gives you kind of an idea of where the person is and what they're thinking. But it's more so used as a discussion tool versus, I mean, because you could have somebody in there could say, my mother is evil. And you're like, oh, that's it. I'm calling, I mean, you don't instantly say, okay, they said their mother's evil. There must be something terrible here. I mean, it could be that on the way out the door, they were told they couldn't have their phone for 2 more days. I mean, you just don't know. So you definitely have to take all of these with lots of salt. Ah, I'm sad. That is the end. So to talk with you guys